The harsh desert sun bore down mercilessly on Sarah Miller's homestead as she hung laundry in the yard, her weathered hands moving mechanically through the familiar motions. The isolated ranch sat like a defiant outpost amid the vast expanse of scrubland outside Silver City, where her late husband William had staked their claim 5 years ago. Now a widow at 32, Sarah maintained the modest spread alone, save for her 10-year-old daughter Emma, who was currently inside practicing her letters. A cloud of dust on the horizon caught Sarah's attention, her eyes narrowing as she tracked its progress across the desert floor. Riders approaching usually meant trouble these days, with tensions mounting between the Army and Apache bands in the territory. She unconsciously touched the old revolver holstered at her hip, William's final gift before the fever took him last winter. The distant thunder of hoofbeats grew closer, and Sarah could make out the distinctive blue uniforms of cavalry soldiers. Leading them was Lieutenant James Thompson, a man whose dedication to his duties often crossed the line into cruel zealotry. Sarah had seen enough of his handiwork to know that any Apache in his custody would face a harsh fate indeed. "Ma, soldiers coming," Emma called from the doorway, her young face pinched with worry. Sarah motioned her daughter back inside, knowing the girl shared her distrust of Thompson and his men. They'd witnessed his troops burning Apache camps last season, including those of peaceful bands who traded regularly with Silver City's merchants. The patrol thundered into the yard in a swirl of dust and jangling tack. Sarah counted 8 riders, all looking trail-worn and irritated. Lieutenant Thompson reined his mount to a halt before her, not bothering to dismount as protocol would dictate. His cold eyes swept the property with predatory intensity. "Mrs. Miller," Thompson said curtly, "we're pursuing a wounded Apache warrior who was spotted heading this direction, probably seeking to raid isolated homesteads. You see any sign of the savage?" His hand rested meaningfully on his holstered pistol, a gesture Sarah didn't miss. The lieutenant's questions often carried unspoken threats. Before Sarah could respond, she caught a flash of movement in her peripheral vision, a shadow ducking behind the root cellar. Her heart hammered, but she kept her expression neutral. "No Apache raiders here, Lieutenant. Just me and Emma, same as always." She met his suspicious gaze steadily, years of frontier life having taught her to mask her thoughts. Thompson studied her for a long moment before jerking his head in a sharp nod. "We'll check the outbuildings anyway. Standard procedure." He barked orders and his men dismounted, spreading out across the property. Sarah's hands clenched in the folds of her skirt as she watched them search, praying they wouldn't find what she'd glimpsed. The search dragged on for nearly an hour under the baking sun. Sarah forced herself to continue hanging laundry, keeping Emma inside despite the girl's curiosity. She could hear the soldiers' boots crunching on gravel as they circled the house and outbuildings, checking every possible hiding place with methodical thoroughness. Finally, Thompson called his men back. "Nothing here," he announced grudgingly. "But keep your doors locked, Mrs. Miller. These savages can't be trusted. They'll kill you and the girl without hesitation." His words dripped with barely concealed malice. Sarah simply nodded, maintaining her calm facade until the patrol rode away in another cloud of dust. As the sound of hoofbeats faded, Sarah hurried to the root cellar. Sure enough, hidden behind stacked crates of preserves was a young Apache warrior, barely more than a boy. Blood stained his buckskin shirt where a bullet had torn through his shoulder. His dark eyes watched her warily, hand gripping a knife. "I mean you no harm," Sarah said softly, slowly raising her empty palms. "I'm Sarah Miller. Let me help you." She knew some Apache traders and had picked up a few words of their language, but this young man's blank expression suggested he didn't understand English. Still, her gentle tone seemed to reach him. The warrior's grip on his knife loosened slightly as blood loss and exhaustion took their toll. Sarah approached carefully, gesturing to his wound. After a tense moment, he gave a slight nod of permission. She helped him to his feet, supporting his weight as they made their way to the house. Emma gasped when they entered but quickly recovered, running to fetch clean cloths and water as Sarah had taught her. As Sarah cleaned and bandaged the wound, she studied her unexpected patient. Despite his youth, his bearing spoke of warrior training, and the elaborate beadwork on his clothing marked him as someone of importance in his tribe. She wondered what circumstances had brought him here, alone and wounded. The rest of that day passed in tense vigilance as Sarah tended to the warrior's injury, always alert for the sound of returning soldiers. Emma proved an eager nurse, bringing water and fresh bandages without being asked. The young Apache watched them both with guarded curiosity, accepting their care in stoic silence. As dusk approached, Sarah heard the distant thunder of hoofbeats. Her heart raced as she quickly helped the wounded Apache warrior into the root cellar beneath the kitchen floorboards. Emma scattered fresh straw over the trapdoor, while Sarah returned the furniture to its proper place, both women moving with practiced efficiency born from years of frontier life. The riders appeared through the heat waves rising from the desert floor. A patrol of 6 soldiers from the Fort Worth garrison, their blue uniforms coated in dust. Sarah stepped onto her porch, wiping her hands on her apron with calculated casualness as the men reined their horses to a stop. She recognized Lieutenant Thomas, a frequent visitor to the trading post her late husband had established. "Evening, Mrs. Bradley," Thomas called out, touching the brim of his hat. "We're tracking a young Apache warrior, wounded in a skirmish near Silver City. Trail led this way before we lost it in the rocks." His keen eyes scanned the yard as he spoke, noting the fresh water bucket by the door and the disturbed earth near the garden. Sarah felt her pulse quicken but kept her expression neutral, years of trading with both settlers and natives having taught her the value of an unreadable face. Emma appeared in the doorway, her small face solemn as she clutched her ragdoll. The child had learned early that survival in the desert required keeping certain secrets, especially from the military men who brought both protection and problems to the scattered homesteads. Sarah rested a reassuring hand on her daughter's shoulder while maintaining her conversation with the lieutenant. The summer heat pressed down like a physical weight as Sarah explained that she'd been too busy with household chores to notice any passing travelers. The soldiers' horses stamped restlessly, raising small clouds of dust that danced in the slanting evening light. A hawk circled overhead, its cry carrying across the empty landscape that stretched toward the distant mountains. After what seemed an eternity, Lieutenant Thomas finally gave the order to move out. The patrol turned their mounts toward Tombstone, where they maintained a small outpost. Sarah and Emma remained on the porch until the riders disappeared into the gathering darkness, the sound of hoofbeats fading into the desert's eternal silence. When they finally dared to check the root cellar, they found their patient had developed a fever. Sarah spent the night applying cool cloths to his forehead, while Emma kept watch at the window, alert for any returning soldiers. The warrior drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes murmuring words in Apache that Sarah couldn't understand, though she recognized the name James, spoken several times. By morning, the fever had broken. The young Apache's dark eyes were clear and alert as Sarah changed his bandages. To her surprise, he spoke in careful English, introducing himself as Two Hawks, son of a chief who had once made peace treaties with James Bradley, Sarah's husband, before his death 2 years prior. The connection explained why he had sought refuge at their homestead. As the days passed, Two Hawks regained his strength. He proved to be a quiet but observant guest, teaching Emma simple Apache words while helping Sarah spot the desert plants with medicinal properties. The trust between them grew slowly, like the hardy flowers that somehow found life in the unforgiving landscape around the homestead. One evening, as the sunset painted the desert in shades of amber and rose, Two Hawks presented Sarah with a small leather pouch decorated with intricate beadwork. Inside was an amulet carved from turquoise, worn smooth by generations of handling. He explained that it was a sacred object, passed down through his family line, given only to those who had proven themselves true friends to his people. The protection it offered, he said, would extend not just to Sarah and Emma, but to their descendants for as long as the desert winds blew across the land. The weight of the turquoise amulet against Sarah's chest became a constant reminder of that fateful decision to help Two Hawks. As summer faded into autumn, life at the homestead settled into a cautious rhythm, though Sarah remained vigilant. Emma had taken to watching the horizon each evening, as if expecting their Apache friend to emerge from the golden haze like a desert spirit. Their peaceful routine was disrupted one dusty afternoon when a patrol of cavalry soldiers led by Lieutenant William Hayes arrived at the homestead. Sarah's heart thundered in her chest as the lieutenant dismounted, his boots raising small clouds of dust. He explained they were tracking a band of Apaches who had reportedly been raiding settlements near Silver City, and asked if she'd seen any suspicious activity. The amulet seemed to grow heavier as Sarah met the lieutenant's questioning gaze. She thought of Two Hawks, of the trust he'd placed in her, and of the sacred bond now connecting their families. With steady hands and an unwavering voice, she offered the soldiers water and assured them she'd seen nothing unusual. Sarah Miller's hands trembled as she pressed a damp cloth against the Apache warrior's wound, his dark eyes watching her every move from the shadows of her root cellar. The late afternoon sun filtered through the cracks between the floorboards above, casting thin ribbons of light across his face. She could hear the distant thunder of cavalry horses, growing closer with each passing moment. Just hours ago, she had been hanging laundry when he stumbled onto her homestead outside Silver City, an arrow protruding from his shoulder. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, and Sarah's heart raced as she ascended the cellar steps to face the approaching soldiers. Lieutenant James Thompson led the patrol, his blue uniform coat covered in the fine red dust of the New Mexico territory. "Ma'am," he touched the brim of his hat, "we're tracking a renegade Apache. Seen any sign of him?" Sarah kept her voice steady as she shook her head, praying the tremor in her hands wouldn't betray her. Below in the cool darkness, the warrior remained perfectly still, his breathing shallow and controlled despite the pain. Sarah had removed the arrow and bound the wound with strips torn from one of her precious bed sheets. She didn't know his name or why the soldiers pursued him, but something in his dignified bearing and the quiet gratitude in his eyes had moved her to offer sanctuary. Her late husband William would have called her a fool, but 6 months a widow had taught her to trust her own judgment. Lieutenant Thompson ordered his men to search the property. Sarah's pulse quickened as boots thumped across the floorboards overhead. The cellar entrance lay beneath a rug in her kitchen, and she had pushed her heavy oak table over it. Still, discovery seemed only moments away. She busied herself making coffee for the soldiers, keeping them in the main room while silently willing them to leave. The warrior had pressed a strange leather pouch into her hands before she'd gone up. She could feel its weight in her apron pocket. The search revealed nothing, and as the sun began to set, Thompson reluctantly gave the order to move on. They would continue toward Tombstone, he said, believing their quarry had headed south. Sarah watched them disappear into the gathering dusk, dust rising behind their horses like copper-colored smoke. Only when the last echoes of hoofbeats had faded did she dare return to the cellar. The warrior had not moved from where she'd left him, but his eyes held a new warmth when they met hers. In halting English, he explained that the pouch contained a sacred amulet, passed down through generations of medicine men in his family. By saving his life, Sarah had earned its protection, and that of his people, for as long as she lived. She started to protest, but he pressed it back into her hands with gentle insistence. The firelight caught the intricate beadwork as she carefully opened it, revealing a small leather-wrapped bundle that seemed to pulse with its own inner heat. That night, as Sarah tended his wound and shared her simple supper, the warrior told her his story. He was no renegade, but a peace chief's son, falsely accused of attacking a military patrol. The real culprits were rogue warriors from a different band, but the army cared little for such distinctions. His name, he said, was one she couldn't pronounce, but she could call him Thomas, the name of a missionary who had once shown him kindness, as she had done. Thomas stayed 3 days, regaining his strength in the cellar while Sarah kept watch and brought him food and water. They spoke little, but a deep understanding grew between them. On the 4th night, she woke to find him gone, the cellar empty except for a single eagle feather laid carefully on the blanket where he had rested. The amulet's weight against her chest felt warmer, more alive somehow. She knew their paths would cross again, though she couldn't have said how she knew. Word spread through Silver City of increased Apache activity in the following weeks, but no raids touched Sarah's homestead. Traders reported seeing strange lights dancing on her roof at night, and mysterious tracks that circled her property but never crossed its boundaries. The townspeople whispered that she had witch powers, but Sarah simply smiled and went about her business. The amulet's heat had become familiar now, a constant reminder of the night she chose mercy over fear and found protection in the most unexpected place. Lieutenant Thompson returned once more, months later, his manner less certain now. He'd heard stories about her land being somehow guarded, he said. Sarah offered him coffee but no explanations. As he turned to leave, she caught him studying the eagle feather she'd mounted above her door. The question in his eyes remained unasked, and she simply smiled, touching the hidden amulet beneath her shawl. Some mysteries, she had learned, were better left unexplained. As autumn turned the desert sage to gold, Sarah's peaceful solitude was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. William Thompson, the lieutenant's younger brother, arrived with a land claim document bearing the governor's seal. He was a thin man with spectacles and an ill-fitting suit, claiming the territory office had discovered irregularities in her homestead papers. The amulet burned against her skin as he spoke, and she noticed how his eyes darted nervously to the strange markings that had appeared in the dirt around her property line. Sarah knew the true reason behind this sudden scrutiny. Silver City was expanding, and the railroad surveyors had marked a route that would cut through the eastern edge of her land. The protective boundary that kept her safe had become an inconvenience to progress, and now powerful men sought ways to break it. She invited William inside, serving him coffee in the same cup his brother had used months before, watching him shift uncomfortably in his chair. The desert wind carried whispers of change beyond her fence posts. Traders brought news of Catherine, a widow in Tombstone who'd been visited by Apache riders in the night, leaving similar markings around her property. Sarah recognized the pattern. Other acts of mercy were being repaid, a network of protection spreading across the territory like an invisible web. But with it came increased attention from those who feared what they couldn't understand. James, the aging sheriff of Silver City, paid her a visit one dusty afternoon. Unlike the Thompson brothers, he spoke plainly about his concerns. The railroad men were spreading rumors, he warned, about pagan rituals and dark alliances. Some wanted to send for a marshal from Fort Worth to investigate. Sarah saw the worry in his weathered face. He'd known her since she first arrived, and now he feared he couldn't protect her from what was coming. The amulet's power seemed to grow stronger as threats gathered. One morning, Sarah found fresh Apache tracks leading to her well, where a silver bracelet had been left, a message she understood without words. That night, watching from her porch as distant torches moved along the railroad survey line, she felt the weight of a choice approaching. The protection she'd been given was becoming a test of loyalty to the expanding nation that claimed this land, or to the deeper truth she'd discovered about mercy and justice. In town, she overheard Elizabeth, the banker's wife, telling others how Sarah's crops flourished while other farms withered in the drought. The woman's voice dripped with suspicion, but Mary, the shopkeeper, defended Sarah fiercely. The town was dividing not just over her, but over the larger question of what would be lost as the railroad's iron rails cut through their world. Sarah recognized that her small act of compassion had grown into something that threatened the comfortable certainties of progress. The amulet led her to discover hidden springs and ancient pathways across her land. She began to understand that the protection wasn't just a barrier. It was a connection to knowledge that had been here long before Silver City's first stone was laid. When Samuel, an old Apache scout-turned-trader, visited her store, his knowing look told her that others understood too. The desert held secrets that couldn't be mapped by railroad surveyors or claimed by land office papers. As winter approached, bringing cold winds down from the mountains, Sarah felt the tension building like a thunderstorm across the desert. The Thompson brothers' legal threats continued, but now they were tinged with desperation. The railroad's schedule was firm, and her land stood in its way. But the marks around her property grew deeper, the nighttime lights brighter, and her resolve stronger. She had chosen mercy once, and that choice had revealed a deeper truth about protection and power in this harsh land. The amulet's heat against her chest reminded her daily that some boundaries were meant to remain uncrossed, some knowledge meant to stay protected. As riders passed in the night and papers piled up on her table, Sarah understood that her small act of kindness had placed her at the crossroads of two worlds, one rushing forward with the speed of steam and steel, the other moving in ancient circles that had kept their own time in these lands since before memory. The first snow dusted the desert peaks when Thomas Thompson rode into Sarah's yard, alone this time, his usual bravado replaced by something more calculated. He dismounted slowly, removing his hat as Sarah watched from the porch, her hand instinctively touching the amulet beneath her shawl. The younger Thompson's approach worried her more than his brother William's outright threats. Thomas had always been the clever one. "Miss Sarah," he called out, keeping a respectful distance. "Might we speak inside? I've brought a proposition that could benefit us both." The wind kicked up dust devils around his boots as she considered his request. After a moment, she nodded, but left the door open as they entered her home, the winter light streaming in behind them. Over coffee she'd rather not have served, Thomas laid out maps and figures, speaking of partnerships and profit shares that made the railroad's offer seem paltry in comparison. Sarah Thompson's heart pounded as she heard the soldiers' horses approaching her isolated farmhouse outside Silver City. The wounded Apache warrior she had hidden in her root cellar 2 days ago was still too weak to move, and she knew the patrol would search every building. Her decision to help him had come from a deep-seated belief that all life was sacred, regardless of the conflicts that raged across the desert frontier. The warrior, who had introduced himself as Nightwind in broken English, had stumbled onto her property with a bullet wound in his shoulder. Rather than fear him as most settlers would, Sarah had seen the pain and exhaustion in his eyes that transcended any differences between their peoples. Her late husband James would have understood. He had always taught their children that compassion knew no boundaries. Lieutenant William Davis dismounted at her gate, his blue uniform stark against the desert landscape. 20 soldiers followed him, their rifles ready as they spread out around the property. Sarah straightened her apron and walked out to meet them, praying her face wouldn't betray the secret she kept below ground. The summer heat bore down mercilessly as dust devils danced across the yard. "Mrs. Thompson," Davis called out, removing his hat, "we're tracking a renegade Apache warrior. Scouts spotted him heading this direction 2 days ago. Have you seen anything unusual?" His keen eyes studied her face as he spoke. Sarah had known William since he was a boy in Silver City, but now he represented the authority she found herself opposing for the first time in her life. "Nothing out of the ordinary, Lieutenant," she replied steadily. "Just the usual coyotes and buzzards." She gestured to the barren landscape around them. "Though I did hear some commotion to the south yesterday morning. Might have been your Apache friend heading toward the mountains." The lie felt bitter on her tongue, but she kept her expression neutral as she had learned to do through years of frontier hardship. The soldiers began their search, checking the barn, chicken coop, and storage shed. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she watched them approach the root cellar doors. She had carefully arranged barrels and crates to make it appear unused, praying it would be enough. Lieutenant Davis himself walked over to inspect it, and Sarah held her breath. "This cellar still in use, ma'am?" he asked, hand resting on the padlock she had strategically placed there. Sarah forced a casual shrug. "Hardly worth the effort anymore since James passed. Haven't opened it in months. The lock's rusted shut." Davis tugged at it experimentally, then nodded and moved on. Sarah silently thanked her husband's spirit for watching over them. As the soldiers remounted and rode south, Sarah waited until their dust trail disappeared before rushing to the cellar. Nightwind lay perfectly still where she had left him, pressed against the cool earth wall. Their eyes met in the dim light, and she saw both gratitude and understanding in his gaze. He had trusted her with his life, and she had proven worthy of that trust. That evening, as Sarah tended his wound, Nightwind pressed something into her palm, a small leather pouch on a cord. Inside was an intricately carved stone amulet. Through halting English and gestures, he explained it was a powerful protection charm passed down through generations of medicine men in his family. By saving his life, she had earned its guardianship. The next morning, Sarah found the cellar empty. Nightwind had slipped away in the darkness, but the amulet remained around her neck. As she clutched it, watching the sunrise paint the desert in gold and crimson, she understood that some bonds transcended the artificial boundaries humans created. Her act of compassion had forged a connection that would ripple through generations to come. Thunder rolled in the distance as dark clouds gathered over the mountains. Sarah smiled, knowing the summer rains would wash away any traces of Nightwind's presence. Lieutenant Davis and his men would find nothing but empty desert. The secret she carried would remain safe, protected by the same spirits that had guided an Apache warrior to her door. As weeks passed, Sarah began to notice subtle changes. Coyotes no longer bothered her chickens. Her wells remained full despite the drought. And sometimes, in the deepest hours of night, she would wake to the sound of distant drumming on the wind, a reminder that she was now under the protection of powers older than the frontier itself. Word spread through Silver City about Sarah Thompson's uncanny good fortune. Some attributed it to luck, others to divine providence. But Sarah knew the truth lay in a simple act of human kindness, repaid with a gift that bridged two worlds. The amulet around her neck was more than just a charm. It was a symbol of hope that different peoples could find common ground. Lieutenant Davis visited occasionally, clearly suspicious but unable to prove anything. Sarah maintained her calm demeanor, though the amulet seemed to warm against her skin whenever he was near. She had chosen her path and would not waver from it, no matter the consequences. The frontier had taught her that true strength often lay in quiet acts of defiance. As autumn approached, bringing cooler winds and longer shadows, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. A young Apache woman appeared at her door one morning, bearing a bundle of herbs and a knowing smile. Without words, she showed Sarah how to use the plants for healing. The amulet's protection, it seemed, extended to sharing ancient knowledge. The lessons continued in secret through the changing seasons. Sarah learned to read the desert's signs, to hear messages in the wind, to find water where others saw only dust. The amulet grew warm with each new understanding, as if pleased by the bridging of cultures. She knew she had become part of something far larger than herself. The peaceful rhythm of Sarah's frontier life shattered one stormy evening when thunderclouds gathered over the desert. Lieutenant William burst into her cabin, his uniform caked with dust and his eyes wild with urgency. A band of Apache warriors had been spotted heading toward Silver City, and he demanded to know if she'd seen any suspicious activity. As he spoke, the amulet burned against her chest, its heat both a warning and a reminder of her sacred trust. The young Apache woman who had been teaching Sarah appeared from the back room, her presence impossible to conceal. William's hand moved to his pistol, but Sarah stepped between them, her voice steady as summer rain. "She's under my protection," Sarah declared, the amulet's warmth spreading through her entire body. The lieutenant's face darkened with betrayal and understanding, finally seeing the truth of her allegiance. Thunder cracked overhead as more soldiers surrounded the cabin, led by Thomas, who had harbored suspicions for months. Sarah could hear horses whinnying nervously in the growing storm, while desert wind howled through the canyon like angry spirits. The Apache woman remained calm, her eyes meeting Sarah's with quiet strength, sharing an unspoken plan. Using the knowledge she'd gained of desert herbs, Sarah had prepared for such a moment. She reached for a pouch of dried flowers, crushing them in her palm before casting them into the hearth fire. Sweet-smelling smoke filled the cabin, making the soldiers' eyes water and their heads swim. The Apache woman moved like a shadow, slipping past their guard while they coughed and stumbled. But Lieutenant William, his bandana pressed to his face, lunged for Sarah. The amulet flared with blinding intensity, its turquoise stone emanating a light that forced him back. The soldiers watched in stunned silence as ancient symbols appeared on Sarah's cabin walls, glowing with the same otherworldly radiance. Their weapons lowered in the face of power they couldn't comprehend. Through the open door, Sarah caught glimpses of other Apache warriors materializing from the storm-dark desert, their presence both protective and threatening. They made no hostile moves, but their message was clear. Sarah stood under their guardianship, and any threat to her would be answered. The lieutenant, his face ashen, ordered his men to withdraw. In the aftermath, as the storm passed and stars emerged over the desert, Sarah found a new peace. The amulet's warmth settled into a gentle reminder of her chosen path. Word spread through both worlds, the frontier settlements and the Apache territories, of the white woman who bridged two peoples. Some called her a traitor, others a mystic. But Sarah knew she was simply following the truth her heart had recognized that fateful day. The young Apache woman returned regularly, bringing others who sought healing or shelter. Sarah's cabin became a secret sanctuary where ancient wisdom flowed between cultures like water in a desert stream. The soldiers maintained an uneasy distance, their reports mysteriously losing mentions of her location when they reached Fort Worth or Tombstone. As winter approached, Sarah received a vision through the amulet. She saw herself teaching others, both settlers and natives, the way of balance and respect she had learned. The desert itself seemed to approve, sending gentle rains that made wildflowers bloom out of season around her cabin. She understood then that her protection of one wounded warrior had grown into something far more significant, a legacy of peace in a land too often torn by misunderstanding and fear. The amulet's power had transformed her from a simple settler woman into a keeper of two worlds, a role she accepted with quiet dignity. Through her actions, she had become part of an ancient story, one that would be whispered around fires long after the frontier had faded into history. The desert winds carried her tale to those who needed to hear it, a reminder that the bravest choices are often made in moments of simple human compassion. The amulet hung heavy around Sarah Miller's neck as she watched the Apache riders appear like spirits from the desert haze. Her heart quickened, remembering that fateful day 3 months ago when she had hidden the wounded warrior in her root cellar. Now, as the small band approached her isolated homestead outside Silver City, She recognized the distinctive bear claw necklace of the warrior she had saved, his proud silhouette unmistakable against the setting sun. William Thompson, the cavalry lieutenant who had led the pursuit that day, still visited regularly, hoping to court Sarah despite her quiet rebuffs. She touched the turquoise and silver amulet, recalling how the Apache warrior had pressed it into her hands before disappearing into the night. "Protection," he had whispered in broken English. "For you and your children's children." She hadn't understood then what that truly meant. The Apache riders drew closer, their horses' hooves kicking up small clouds of dust in the fading light. Sarah's young son Thomas played near the water pump, oblivious to the tension building in the air. She resisted the urge to call him inside, somehow knowing these warriors meant no harm. The leader raised his hand in greeting, and Sarah found herself returning the gesture, the amulet seeming to pulse with warmth against her skin. That morning, she had received word that Lieutenant Thompson was leading another patrol into Apache territory, despite the recent peace talks. The news had filled her with dread, not for herself, but for the complex web of trust and protection that had grown from her simple act of mercy. The warrior she had saved was more than just a man. He was the son of a powerful medicine man, and the amulet carried generations of sacred power. The riders circled her homestead once, their presence both a warning and a promise. Sarah understood they were showing themselves deliberately, letting her know they watched over her land. In the months since she had hidden the warrior, no rustlers had dared approach her cattle. No thieves had targeted her isolated home. Even the worst drought in years had somehow spared her wells and grazing land. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the desert in deep purples and golds, the Apache leader dismounted. Sarah's breath caught as she recognized him. Not the warrior she had saved, but an older man with deep lines etched in his face and wisdom in his eyes. He approached slowly, hands raised to show peaceful intentions. Thomas ran to his mother's side, more curious than afraid. "You have honored our ways," the old man spoke in clear English, surprising Sarah. "My son lives because of your courage. The amulet you wear was my grandmother's. It carries the strength of our ancestors." He touched the turquoise stones gently. "Its power grows with the goodness of its bearer. You have proven worthy of its blessing." Lieutenant Thompson's patrol appeared on the distant ridge, their blue uniforms stark against the darkening sky. Sarah's heart raced, but the old medicine man remained calm. With fluid grace, he remounted his horse. "They will see nothing," he assured her. "The desert herself shields those under our protection." As if to prove his words, a sudden dust devil sprang up, obscuring the Apache riders as they melted away into the landscape. When William Thompson rode up minutes later, his patrol spreading out to search the area, he found only Sarah and Thomas by their water pump, the desert wind playing with their hair. "Thought I saw riders," he said, scanning the empty horizon. "Indians, maybe." Sarah touched her amulet and smiled mysteriously. "Just the wind," she replied, "making shadows in the sunset." That night, as Sarah tucked Thomas into bed, he asked about the riders they had seen. She sat on the edge of his bed, fingering the amulet that had come to mean so much more than mere protection. "Sometimes," she told him softly, "the bravest thing we can do is show kindness to those others fear. And sometimes, that kindness comes back to us in ways we never expected." Years passed, and Sarah's homestead prospered while others struggled. The amulet passed to Thomas, then to his daughter Emma, and down through generations of Millers. Each bearer added their own story of mysterious protection, of help appearing when most needed, of darkness turned away from their threshold. The desert itself seemed to embrace them, and on quiet nights, they would sometimes hear the distant sound of hooves, a reminder that compassion's rewards echo through time. As Sarah's great-granddaughter Catherine sat on the same porch many years later, watching her own children play in the sunset's glow, she wore the ancient amulet and remembered the story of the woman who had dared to show mercy when others would have turned away. The desert wind whispered around her, carrying the wisdom of both her ancestors and the Apache people who had bound their fates together with a simple act of kindness. The legacy of Sarah's choice lived on not just in the amulet's power, but in the hearts of her descendants. They learned to see beyond fear and prejudice, to recognize the humanity in all people. The protection promised by the warrior extended far beyond physical safety. It had given them a heritage of courage, compassion, and wisdom that no amount of gold could match. As twilight deepened over the desert, Catherine traced the worn edges of the amulet, its surface warm against her fingertips despite the cooling air. Her youngest daughter, Emma, named after the great aunt who had helped Sarah tend to the wounded warrior so many years ago, came to sit beside her on the weathered porch steps. The child's eyes held the same quiet wisdom that Catherine remembered seeing in her grandmother's gaze, a testament to the legacy that flowed through their bloodline. "Tell me again about the soldiers, Mama," Emma whispered, leaning against Catherine's shoulder. The story had become a sacred tradition, passed down through generations like the amulet itself. But tonight, Catherine felt compelled to share a part of the tale she'd never revealed before. The aftermath that had shaped their family's destiny in ways Sarah could never have imagined. In the years following Sarah's act of mercy, the Apache warrior had kept his promise in ways both subtle and profound. When drought threatened their homestead in 1899, mysterious water sources appeared just when hope seemed lost. During the Great Wildfire of 1903 that devastated much of the territory between Silver City and Tombstone, flames had inexplicably curved around their property, leaving it untouched while neighboring ranches burned. Catherine's father, Thomas, had once encountered a group of raiders on the road to Fort Worth, only to watch in amazement as they turned away without explanation, their leader's hand moving to touch something at his throat, an amulet that matched their own. The protection extended beyond physical safety, weaving itself into the very fabric of their family's existence. The desert itself seemed to acknowledge their special status. Crops flourished when others failed, and their horses always found their way home, even in the blindest sandstorms. But with these blessings came responsibility, a sacred duty to maintain the bridge between two worlds that Sarah had built with her compassion. "Our family has a different way of seeing," Catherine explained to Emma, watching the last rays of sunlight paint the mesas in shades of amber and rose. "When others see enemies, we look for common ground. When they see strangers, we recognize brothers and sisters. That's the real power of the amulet, not just protection but understanding." Through the years, their homestead had become a quiet sanctuary for those in need, regardless of their origin. Like Sarah before them, they offered shelter without question, healing without judgment. The Apache people still remembered, and occasionally, a shadow would appear at their door in the dead of night, seeking refuge. They never turned anyone away. The desert wind carried voices from the past. Sarah's gentle determination, the warrior's solemn promise, the countless lives touched by that single act of mercy. Catherine had learned that the amulet's true magic lay not in its mysterious powers, but in the way it reminded them of their duty to honor that legacy of compassion. As darkness settled over the land, Emma's small hand reached up to touch the amulet hanging around her mother's neck. "Will I wear it someday?" she asked, her voice carrying the weight of generations. Catherine smiled, knowing that her daughter already understood the responsibility that came with their inheritance. It wasn't just an ornament to be passed down, but a testament to the power of choosing love over fear, mercy over vengeance. In the distance, a coyote's call echoed across the desert, answered by another far away. A reminder that no soul truly walked alone in this vast landscape. The stars emerged one by one, the same stars that had witnessed Sarah's choice so long ago. Catherine held her daughter close, feeling the steady pulse of their shared heritage beating in time with the ancient rhythm of the land. The amulet gleamed softly in the starlight, its surface etched with symbols that spoke of protection, unity, and the eternal connection between all living things. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to honor Sarah's legacy. But for now, Catherine and Emma sat together in the gathering darkness, two more links in the unbroken chain of compassion that stretched back through time, anchored in one woman's courage to see beyond the boundaries of fear and prejudice. As the night deepened, Catherine began to sing an old song, one that Sarah had learned from the Apache people during those days of healing. The melody carried across the desert, a bridge between past and present, between cultures and hearts, between the visible world and the unseen forces that watched over them all. In that moment, the protection promised by the warrior felt as tangible as the amulet itself. Not just a shield against harm, but a reminder of their eternal connection to this land and its people.